It's a huge pleasure for Voices from Oxford to welcome Nik Powell. Nik is the sort of person who can make even the driest academics laugh. At least the last time he talked to us, that is exactly what happened.
This one is drier.
The chairs were rocking around this way and that way. He's also somebody with an extraordinary number of arrows to his bow. In his early days, I think he competed with Richard Branson in pretending to found Virgin.
That's right.
Roughly speaking, yes. He then did an extraordinary career of producing and making films of one kind or another with prizes galore this way and that way. And he's now entered a sort of academic position because he is director of a school. It's the National Film and Television School, which is surely the most successful in the United Kingdom. You mention Harry Potter, David Yates, and so on and so on. They've done it. Probably therefore the best in Europe, the best in the world. We'll see.
We're in the Hollywood Reporter top 10 film schools in the world.
Right. No more ado. The last time Nik talked to us, it was the Gospel according to Nik Powell, and this time it is an A to Z of storytelling. Nik, over to you.
This is a sort of this is a storytelling from the point of view of us producers, not from the point of view of an academic, not from the point of view of a writer, not from the point of view of a director. And what I have done is taken stuff, for want of a better word, from some of the great storytellers of the world, both modern and very ancient. And I'll start with Plato, because this is obviously very fundamental to us producers, that we want to control the stories, which is why we're always in conflict with writers, directors and other people trying to do their thing. But although if we're good producers, of course, we won't be in conflict. We'll be underpinning what those storytellers want to do. And A is for audience. You'll be surprised how many storytellers don't want to tell their stories to other people. And I always think a good sign of a natural storyteller is can they tell a story in a pub or at dinner and time it nicely and come in with whatever the denouement of the story is. And sometimes I'm worried when we select a student, say at the National Film and Television School, and I hear them telling a story and I think, they haven't got it. They just haven't got it. And this is the great Alexander McKendrick, who those of you who are old enough will remember from Whiskey Galore, another classic British films of the 50s and 60s. And then he became a teacher. He finished his directing career earlier. He became an iconic teacher at one of the California film schools, UCLA, I think it was. And he was very big that people do seem to forget. And not only that, but in our particular form of storytelling, people pay money, and they may have better things to spend their money on, and they may have better, or in the case of free things, they've got better places to go, and therefore keeping them getting them into our world and keeping them within it is really fundamental. I'm going to go back to the 1950s. Ben Hecht, one of the great kind of playwrights, and then became one of the great writers for Hollywood, wrote a lot of the Billy Wilder movies. He had a very simple formula. So I came to Hollywood, I worked it all out, and this is how you have to write a film in Hollywood. Act one, you get him or her up the tree, although being a 1950s guy, he actually said, get him up the tree. And then in Act 2, you throw stones at him, and you know what Act 3 is going to be? You get him down again. And people pay a lot of money to go to these kind of guru script things that cost like $2,000 or $5,000 for like a week. And this is basically what they teach you. And so you can have it for me for free, or for Ben Hecht, in fact, for free. But I took to maybe a different thing about storytelling, and this is from one of my favourite writers. You'll see if you can guess, who it is. But it's a British playwright come scriptwriter in this case. And I sort of have to read this because otherwise I get it all wrong. But I like reading it because I can do blood and love without the rhetoric. I can do blood and rhetoric without the love. I can do all three, concurrent or consecutive. But I cannot do your love and rhetoric without the blood. Blood is compulsory. They're all blood, you see. Any guesses? That's Tom Stoppard. That has to be Tom Stoppard. And he did a lot of stuff that he does, but that's my favourite. And of course, we producers like it if the blood is real. But of course, Tom Stoppard doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be real, but it can be metaphorical blood. But in our particular business, we sort of feel that in cinema you can be more extreme. So if there's an opportunity to have some blood, you should have it. Mm-hmm. And this is going back to the 19th century. And I would be interested if you can see who said this. I think it's the big bow wow is this 19th century novelist wrote. The big bow wow strain I can do myself, as good as anyone. But the exquisite touch which renders ordinary commonplace things and characters interesting from the truth of the description and the sentiment is denied me. So who is saying that about whom? And then I know it's early in the evening, but that's Walter Scott, who of course is really an old version of action directors and writers of today, on of course Jane Austen. Oh. And I think it's a lovely piece of writing, and so I decided I'd take a modern big bow wower, Tarantino, and famous of course for his mixing of genres, and again he has a lovely way with words. Violence and action, is the bill of fare for genre, and as we know, and he loves to set up a great genre situation and then have real life and come in, and I'm not allowed to say that word, and mess it up. What sounds the same. And then his whole theory of Tarantino is probably correct, that a camera was really invented to capture violence, because if you think what they did with the camera when it first came, it was still kind of sent out to the Civil War, the American Civil War. I mean, that was where cameras first went, was to cover any kind of conflict, death, extreme happenings in and around the world. And of course he loves that. And he has the same thing, that for him the audience is his orchestra. So that's just really summarising conflict and contradiction. I love that. With McDonald's under the childhood obesity campaign, and see, of course, it's the camera angles, because the thing that we have in storytelling in cinema that you don't have on the written page, although you do kind of have it in the written page, because of course when you read something and it goes into your mind, you are taking a point of view. You see a room when it's described from the view that you choose to take it. So you do sort of, but we have it for real, and the way that you position it, I have a much naughtier one, but I'm not showing it tonight. But I think I showed it last time, so that's why I'm not going to do that. And then C is for character, of course, because there are no stories without characters, and the great thing about cinema, storytelling, and I think in some ways all storytelling, is characters for me should be larger than life. Even when they're in a Ken Loach film, they're still actually larger than life and more extreme, even though they're doing so-called, kitchen sink drama. The builders and so on don't really crack. They're not really quite as witty and funny in real life as they are in Ken Loach movies. And so I think it's it's very important. And this was a sort of set of rules that Mark Twain wrote. He wrote it as a piece of criticism of the writer of Last of the Mohicans had published a new book, and Mark Twain basically thought it was and he therefore did a list of the rules of kind of storytelling, and he showed how this new book by Fenimore Cooper offended all the natural rules of storytelling. My favourite one is the third one. They require that the personages that we would call characters in a tale shall always be alive, except in the case of corpses, and that always the reader shall be able to tell the corpses from the others. And that does happen in storytelling. People, introduce these characters, and really we don't need them for our story. And the ability to know what you need, to make your story come alive and what you don't. And of course that's what he says in this last one. There are actually 21 of these rules, but I won't bore you with them all. But the person who tells both dead and alive should exhibit a sufficient excuse for being there. Because on a lot of scripts that cut past my desk over the last 30 years or so, they include also, and you think, what is this character doing here? And they may actually be quite interesting characters, but they don't have a place within the story that we're trying to tell. And D is for drama. You won't, I can't tell you how many scripts I get, both from students and professional filmmakers, or so-called professional filmmakers, and I say to them, before I read it, I say, so kind of what genre is it? I say, Nick, it's a drama, which already is turning me off, but, because other people are good at those. And then I read the script, and I come back, I said, it's not a drama. They said, it is a drama. I said, it's not a drama. And they said, why? I said, because it's not dramatic. So that's what Frank Capra, the great American director of the 40s and 50s, and this is a mistake that so many storytellers and writers and in fact filmmakers make. And it's a, so I'm really from the Raymond Chandler school of storytelling. When you get stuck in your story, have something happen. And of course, I use this because it doesn't have to be a gun. It's just actually all he's saying is make something happen. That we producers, we like it when it is a gun or some other method of destruction. This one I think I will show last time, but it doesn't have to be a gun, it can be a horse. And that is really important in storytelling, that you get stuck at a certain point in the story and you're losing people's attention, and you need something bam to get them back into your world and back interested and back worrying about what's going to happen to the characters in your story. And this is one of my kind of cri de coeurs, because you won't find a single script course in the world that actually pays any attention to dialogue. They're all about structure and all this boring stuff. And but when you think of the films that one likes, I like very often, it's the dialogue that is so fabulous. And it's quite interesting looking at. I think I saw a documentary on Sense and Sensibility. I think it was Pride and Prejudice. And it was really interesting that right back to the first TV version in, late 40s film, and then TV versions, and about 3 TV versions, and another film, TV version, another film. And they showed the same scene, and no one messed with her dialogue. It's fantastic. Every single writer just took the dialogue straight off the page of the original novel and dumped it in the mouths of the actors. And that never happens in the modern day, but they just love the dialogue so much, and it was so fabulous. And of course, Tarantino's at the other end of the spectrum. And obviously, I saw this lecture, and he said, my dialogue is talking in my head and just vomiting it out. My dialogue's like poetry, but not really. My dialogue's like stand-up, not really. My dialogue's like rap, but not really, but kind of is. And then what he does is if he writes a scene, he then calls up a friend of his, not as most people would do, to ask their opinion about the scene, but so he can act the scene out to his friend, and he doesn't want an opinion, he just wants to hear the scene with another pair of ears hearing it. And it makes such a difference when you do that. It's like when you write a talk and you do it to the mirror, but as soon as you do it to just another human being, its tone changes, and it's exactly the same with storytelling. But I do think that dialogue is maybe it's not taught because it can't be taught, but it's certainly not encouraged to be learned. And a lot of filmmakers and writers cop out. They say, oh no, the actors will sort that out. Which, of course, if you're a novelist, you don't have that option. So but if you can write great dialogue, to be honest, my own theory is people who can write great dialogue don't need any structure, because great dialogue comes from great characters, and we're also very amused that it's kind of simple to work the rest out. But the other way round is much harder. And but you won't. So this is. I said this, I think, last time I was here. It's another one of my bête noirs. That I hate the word collaboration, and what we used to do with collaborators in my generation, is shoot them. And I like the word, engagement. But I think that one of the things about obviously film storytelling is it is a group of people, and you can have two results of a group of people. You can have the additionality of all those people putting their thing in, or they all impinge on each other's areas and they destroy those areas, and the film becomes very weak as a result. And if they have a particularly controlling director, then when I've made professional films and I'm paying an actor, I don't know, $500,000 or something like that, and the director's telling him what to do, and I'm saying, I don't mind giving general guidance. I say, no, we're paying all this money because this guy or girl is really fantastic, and I want my money's worth. I don't want the director telling them to do stuff. So engagement is very important. I don't think that you can. I don't think you can tell stories if you don't engage with the world around you, with culture, with politics, with but in particular with the world around you, because in a way, unless you engage, you can't understand it, and if you don't understand it, you can't really tell stories about it, because you're not understanding how people are working. And this is really the editing, because really it's not the final rewrite, by the way, this slide is wrong. The final rewrite is actually the music mix on a movie, because it's the last thing that's done to a picture. Well, actually, they're kind of cool, but the music mix is the last thing. And but editing is after someone has shot what's written on that page, and maybe additional stuff, and maybe not some of the stuff that was on the page, and you put it all together. So that's like doing a rewrite. And then of course you take the cut film into the mixing studio, and again, what you do with it in there, with the music and the sound, will completely, or can completely, change what the story is and about and how it works. This was just Soderbergh again. He was saying about the whole cottage industry. It's really more than a cottage industry. The how-to screening manuals, and I'm not. There's no point in this talk will you hear me tell you how to write. And as a producer, we pay people to write. We don't have to tell them how to write, because we give them good money and we expect them to be able to write. And if they don't, then we just fire them and get someone else to do it. But it's a very important thing, which I think a lot of people are. Now this is again. This is actually one of my favourite characters. There's a guy called Chris Doyle. He's a cinematographer of all the Wong Kar-wai movies and in fact much wider range of commercial movies these days. He's completely nuts, and he goes against a lot of the stuff that people talk about in film, and that was one of my favourite ones. And I think that him and Wong Kar-wai, especially in their early pictures, had a sort of script, but it wasn't really there to be shot. It was just there to tell them what location they're going to, and what characters they're going to be at that location, and then where those characters are meant to get to next. And the rest of it was probably not on the page. But you won't get away with that in the UK, because we're very script dependent, and we start with a script. Like in France, they prepare a movie. Preparation is the first stage. In the UK, we develop a script, so it just shows a different cultural thing because of our, everybody says because of our literary heritage, and they seem to ignore that France also has one. But that's another Chris Doyle, and that's about. For those of you who are making things, this energy of intent is the energy that you create in each scene, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. I hate the word good applied to almost anything, because it really doesn't say anything these days, but this is just, I like the word script effective, that your script is effective. If it is a drama, it's really dramatic. If it is a tearjerker, it really makes people cry. If it is a horror, it frightens people. And the word effective rather than good seems to me to be a better way to approach whether something, is happening. And this is another thing. I'll just put this one in because I'm in a esteemed university, and even more esteemed college within an esteemed university, and you probably know about it. But in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice. But of course, in practice there is, and that's the adage us producers go with. But it doesn't take in any way away from the valuable and amazing work that are done within these kind of walls. But we don't have to worry about that. And this is the other thing about storytelling. This was told to me by István Szabo, who is a terrific Hungarian director of the 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s really. He's still around today, still making films. And he told me this story about a generation before him that used to study at Begit Film School in Moscow, which was the first film school in the world. It's quite interesting, actually, that all the original film schools were started either by fascists or communists, because film was the kind of new technology, the internet of the day, so they wanted to use it, to market their weirdo ideas. And so there was this director, and every morning he would get on a bus and he would set himself the task of learning 50 Russian words. And it was probably easier for a Hungarian than an Englishman, but 50 Russian words so that he could then understand what he was going to be taught when he arrived. But he noticed that there was a little 2-year-old with his dad on the same bus every morning, taking him to I don't know where, not too young for school. I don't think they had kindergartens in those days, but anyway, he saw that this little kid was clearly learning Russian words much faster than he was. And what he took from that was the fact that this kid, unlike my son, was desperate to communicate with his dad. And whereas he was just really learning language as a functional thing in order to be able to understand the world. So this kid was I'm sure there are all sorts of biological and other reasons why the kid learns quicker, because his head is emptier. But anyway, that was this man's story, which is, and the point of it, obviously, whether it is that desire to tell a story, to entertain an audience, to communicate people, is really fundamental to the speed at which you learn all of the different things that's going to make you a cool storyteller in the film medium. And that's the thing. You have to have Shakespeare in anything about storytelling. This is just my favourite one, because it is about. He's talking here about poets, but I think it's about any storyteller, and in any medium, and applies as much to filmmaking as it does to others. And I love that, it turns them into shapes and gives to every nothing a local habitation and a name. And he's talking about poets. I mean, we do that in a much more concrete way with film, and probably a much less poetic way as well. This is coming back actually to the Jane Austen point that Walter Scott was making, and this thing of being able to make the ordinary seem original or extreme or interesting. And you can't just take an ordinary situation and assume other people are going to think it's interesting. You have to do something with it so it becomes interesting. Any guesses as to who said this? This is before the birth of Christ, I think. Horace. So, there's the sort of things that they're putting into these modern cottage industry of script writing courses. They have been saying for a couple of thousand years. And you can find it out for yourself without paying all that money. Probably a little on the internet thing. This is my version of the alphabet, but I couldn't find another place to put it in. So it had a K in it, so it seemed okay to me. I think I showed this last time I was here, so I don't want to bore the people who were here last time. But the storytelling is actually very simple, and a lot of people it's a bit like to make this IKEA car go, you probably need about a fifth of the parts that are there. Maybe 30% of the parts are there, just to get you from A to B. Everything else is frills. And what you find with a lot of people writing scripts is they spend all their time with the frills and none of the time with the core part of their story. And a good producer will always strip a story down to its basics and try and make sure, spend all our time trying to make that core story work. Then we bring in all the other stuff. But most writers, particularly bad ones, they stay with the frills because actually they're not very good at the core thing. And then of course it hugely enhances that. And the other, so this is again a few things, and this is very, because film is so expensive, we producers are, incredibly into using the fewest possible words, and indeed the fewest possible scenes, and indeed the smallest possible sets, and indeed the cheapest possible things and the least number of characters, but that's all economically driven. And of course you can do a hell of a lot now more with digital technology and compositing and being able to create words digitally, although that's still actually quite expensive. But I think that I think you'll know most of those. My favourite is he wrote Standing Up because nothing induces brevity like the caving in at the knees. And that's why I am standing up. This is a nice little thing. McKendrick, coming back to McKendrick, because we're a bit of a fan of him. Of course he's a Scotsman. And he is, this is a lovely thing, he says one hell of a lot of stories do go back to the fairy tale structure. So he was saying that Bicycle Thieves, Hamlet, Cinderella, once upon a time there lived a, who, but, so one day it happened that, which is the man coming in with the gun, or so then as a result of which, I can read this one, but meanwhile, so that unbeknownst to, until the time came when suddenly, to the surprise of, it turned out that, and forever after. And that applies to so many stories. If you strip them back, that is the structure that you'll end out with. And I always, encourage the writers that I work with, just if they're doing that kind of a story, because not every story breaks down to this, of course, but if they're doing that kind of story, to just have a look and see whether or not that structure is being... this is really not for the older people in the room. This is for the younger people. Solovo has this theory, which I think is really cool, that creative people's personal creative development goes through 3 stages, and the first stage is imitation. That's when you try and write a story or make a film like your hero, like Scorsese, like Besson, or like whoever it is that is your hero. And then you realise that you'll never make as good a film as your hero, because only Scorsese is going to ever make a great Scorsese film. It takes people time to realise this, but it's a very useful and necessary thing. Then you go through the autobiographical stage. That's where you think the world around you is absolutely fascinating, but you don't realise that the rest of the world thinks it's really boring. And but you go inside yourself to find autobiographical stories, if you like, to tell the world. And it's a really necessary stage, I think, to go through. And it's fascinating and it's interesting, and 90% of people find out that ultimately their own lives are less interesting than the lives of the people around them. And if they go into the streets or read the newspapers or whatever, and then you move to the original phase, and that's when you start making your own films. Everybody says find your own voice. I think that's a load of crap, if you don't mind me saying so. If you make a film, it is your own voice, because you made it. So you don't have to find it. You might not like your own voice, and you might prefer another voice, and it might not be a very developed voice, but it's your film or your script, and therefore it's your voice. But of course, there are geniuses, and probably quite a few here within like a big university like this. Fortunately, in my little school, it's only 200 people. We don't have a lot of geniuses, and we're lucky. But they're the kind of people. Geniuses are those people that are often, really hard to like, but their work is brilliant. So if you stick to watching their films and don't actually have a drink with them, you're a better off person. And this was the other Soderbergh theory, as whether you have to sort of work out for yourself whether you're an originator or a synthesizer. And what I particularly like with him was he said synthesists who labour under the delusion that they are originators are very unhappy, and he knew this from experience. So he had sort of been through that stage. Most of us are synthesists when it comes down to it, but occasionally we come across a real originator and a real original thing, and I'm sure it applies in every area of thought, not just in storytelling and filmmaking. And P is for passion. This is another one of my bête noirs, because so many people will come and say, Nick, I'm passionate about film, I want to make film, da da da. Passion is not about talking. I use the example, I'm a major Arsenal fan, okay, and don't laugh, but I'm a major Arsenal fan, and we, basically the most passionate Arsenal supporter goes to home and away games. I'm the next level down, I go to all home games, and then the next level down, but basically it's all about doing, not about saying. And I say with my students, is if I've got a small but really fascinating filmmaker visiting the school, the 10 people that are there, they're the ones that I know are going to go places, because they're making it their business to investigate what makes this particular filmmaker interesting, and what can they learn from him or her. That was my son when he was younger. And this is, I love this, Richard Lester, the great comedy director. You learn more and more about what goes wrong, but you never learn what goes right. Don't want to depress you younger people in the room. And this is another central thing to storytelling, that so many storytellers all their characters are the same as them. Which is why it's always better not to meet a writer, actually. But, the characters are actually acting from the same motivations, and, you can't have conflict there. You can't have battles, they need to act from a different moral convictions than the other characters, and that then makes your story much, much more interesting. And, which is why all Irish stories normally involve a drinker and a non-drinker. And this is the journey, really, of the storyteller. You have a great idea for a story, but it's actually the difficult bit, because I always say anybody can create, can compose a pop song or think up a story in the shower. I don't think it's actually that hard. It's not like brain surgery. And but this thing of going from the idea to the result and making that seductive, that's the journey we teach at the National Film and Television School. So, of course, they have to spend time coming up with decent ideas in the first place, but a huge effort goes into keeping that idea fresh and lively and wonderful and close to what it was when it was started. And to be, it'll never be equally seductive, because ideas are always more seductive than reality. But it will be, the closer you can get it to being equally seductive, the better. This is another thing that they say, and is specific to cinema storytelling, and that is all these teachers throughout the world, they say, show, don't tell. And, that's terrible. It's terrible. It goes back to my dialogue thing. It's got a point to it, but David Hare, the playwright, I think, did a lovely piece here. I won't read it all out for you, but I'll put it up there. But it's the amount that you mix of showing and telling that gives you your personal style, that gives you the way you make films and tell a story, within those films. I always use this, it's a pretty old example, I must find a new one, but you need the telling bit underneath in order to make your point. And so it doesn't just work if you just show Bush and a couple of microphones. And this is like, God, I didn't take this out. I didn't take this out because I was in such an august institution. Although they probably T.H. White probably went to Oxford or Cambridge or one of those two. But this is particularly difficult with teaching at the National Film and Television School at postgraduate level. You know, and I have to really restrain our tutors from leaping in. I love the fact Duke Ellington taught. Oh, I didn't know that, but I think it's is particularly apt for what we do, i.e. the making of films, in that you know, it's really difficult when you know how to do something and someone else is having difficulty doing it, but you have to leave them to do it. I'm sure it's the same in maths, isn't it, and other things. You have to kind of leave them there, and biology and so on. But it's particularly difficult in our business. And I find our tutor, what you find when I see the reviews, the tutors are actually trying to get the student to make their film, not the student's film. And you have to rein this back and really, you know, make sure that we're there developing the student's story and not the tutor's idea of what that story should be. And it's a very sort of important things. And I always say it's very important, given your battles on that stuff, I thought it's very important that, you know, that we don't great thing about storytelling, obviously when you tell an old story you know where it's going, but when you're like telling a new one you don't really know where it's going, and it will take you to places that will surprise you, and that's the natural state of things. I try to explain that to our students at the NFTS. It's the natural state is that we don't know where we're going or what's ahead of us, because if we did know the future we would own the world. And we use nowadays everybody says, does the use of technology, you know, change the kind of stories that we either do tell or should be telling? Personally, I don't think so. I think stories have been told much the same way for thousands of years, but differently in different cultures. So, you know, but you can use technology for reasons that it's not designed for, and when people do, you get fantastic results often. And when one person takes a piece of technology that one boffin designed for one reason and another boffin uses it for something else, then you can get very cool things happening. It's exactly the same in storytelling. We had Terry Gilliam at school earlier in the year. You know, he's the only American member of Monty Python, though he is actually a naturalised Brit now. And these are just some of the things that he was saying, which I've sort of taken out. But this is sort of when you're developing your story, or indeed even making your film, the things that you're going to have to deal with. And the big thing is always, whether you're in the storytelling part or you're in the film production part of it, is to stick with the essence of a scene and not get distracted by all of the technical camera, all the stuff that goes on a film set, small or large, and that you keep with that. But my favourite one, because Terry Gilliam is absolutely famous for going zillions over budget and for having the biggest ego in the world. So when he came out with this, I had to say, don't let your ego get between you as the filmmaker and the film. And I said to Terry, you're not really saying that, are you? He said, no, that's absolutely ridiculous. You know, you should never let your ego get between you and the film. And it's absolutely a true statement, even though it's said by someone with a lovely ego, I have to say. And this is just a long thing that I think the importance of silence in not silent movies, and this is obviously Pinter, but I think that you know, the point is well made, that you know, it's the gaps between, and it's the same when you tell a story in a pub or, you know, at dinner or whatever it is. It's sort of when you stop and there's complete silence, and you know whether or not you've got people involved in your story, because there won't be silence if you haven't. You know, they'll go on and talk about something else. And it's exactly the same in a portrayal, in a scene, you know, in a story. And I'm coming to the end, so that's good. And so I've got strict instructions, and this is, I have to keep on telling, you know, the people I have to tell this to most are Brits, and, you know, which is ridiculous. And because if you look at every single major British hit is funny. They may not be comedies, but they're funny, and they have a lot of wit and humour in them. And that's going back 30 years. It's very difficult, apart from Chariots of Fire. Okay, I've written if they knew any jokes, they didn't put them in. And but nearly all of the rest of them, you know, King's Speech, whether you like it or not, is funny. You know, and if you go back, you know, to Danny Boyle's movie the year before, the big English hit, you know, the I Want to Be a Millionaire, the Bollywood Millionaire or whatever it's called, you know, it's funny. It's also harrowing, but it's funny. So it's just I encourage people, you know, if they're going to tell stories, can they please make them funny stories, or at least have the stories with some fun in them. This is just an old quote. Peter Weir told me this story, that when he was the Australian director, great director, and he told me that when he was in Hollywood, and I can't remember which Hollywood character this was, and he was talking about his success, a Billy Wilder style character from old Hollywood, and he said, you know, his charm and energy are the two things that have made him successful. So we said, yeah, no, that's sort of obvious, but then he said, but it's what the audience wants, and so that's what I give them in my films. And so many scripts lack charm and lack energy, and so many stories lack charm and lack energy, and so many films that don't work lack charm and lack energy. And so I think it's good advice to take. I'm going to end up with a Buñuel thing. I'm not going to read it all, but I think it's a lovely thing. It's more about cinema than it is, if you like, about storytelling. And, you know, and it's about, you know, what we all know about art, that everybody perceives it in their own particular way. And, but that, you know, what Buñuel was, I think, saying was, when you take a story and you're making it for cinema, you know, it obviously has to do more than that same story when told in the street, or, you know, when taken from a newspaper. But that doesn't mean don't take your stories from the street or a newspaper, because that's actually where a lot of the great stories come from. And I remember we made Mona Lisa was based on an article in, I think, the News of the World or something, about some guy coming out of jail. But we never admitted to that, of course. And but now it's shut down, I can say it. Just a little bit about our school, just so in case you don't know, it's fantastically successful. I would say that, wouldn't I? Whoops. And but just for you younger people, if you're thinking of coming, you know, it's not just graduates that are mega successful, but the students. So last year we made 8 fiction films, and one of them won the BAFTA for Best Short Film, another one was nominated for an Oscar. So I'm marketing the NFTS to potential applicants, and you have a 1 in 4 chance, if you come to the NFTS, of winning a BAFTA or being nominated for an Oscar. I won't be able to say that beyond the end of next month, because they publish the next lot, but we do have quite a few films in the long list for the Oscars, so I'm hopeful that we might even be in there. So that's really from me, and H.L. Mencken, you had no real words of my own. I've just been going to show these things through people who are great storytellers, and that's why for me they have more resonance than people who teach these things and aren't great storytellers and haven't told great stories or played a part in telling them. But I'd like to say a big thank you. Thank you.